everyone. In our today's video, we are going to be discussing about the structure of spinal cord. Spinal cord is a part of the central nervous system and it is a very important structure because it plays a role in communication between the brain and the other parts of the body. So if the brain wants to send any message to different parts of the body, it is going to happen through the spinal cord. And if all the other parts of the body is going to send a message to the brain for interpretation, again the message has to be sent to the brain through the spinal cord. So this spinal cord is a very important communication center between the brain and other parts of the body. Now let's take a look at the structure of the spinal cord. Spinal cord is located in the neural canal of the vertebral column. So what is this neural canal? So neural canal is nothing but a cavity. Okay, so what is a cavity? A space. So this neural canal is a space or a cavity which is present in the vertebral column. And in this space only the spinal cord is going to be situated. Alright. Now the spinal cord is actually very well protected by the vertebral column. Apart from this, the spinal cord is also protected by additional 3 membranes. So these 3 membranes which are protecting the spinal cord additionally are known as the meninges. Okay. So there are 3 membranes. Okay. So the 3 membranes are only collectively known as meninges. So let's see what are the 3 membranes. The 3 membranes are dura mater, arachnoid membrane, and then the last one is the pia mater. So what is this dura mater? So the word dura means tough. So this dura mater forms the outermost tough covering of the spinal cord. Then what is this arachnoid membrane? This arachnoid membrane looks somewhat like a spider web. The word arachnoid means spider. Okay. So this arachnoid membrane is going to look like a spider web. Its appearance is like a spider web. So this membrane is therefore called as the arachnoid membrane and it is the middle membrane. So this membrane, arachnoid membrane, is in between the dura mater and the pia mater. And the last membrane is the pia mater. This is the innermost membrane. Okay, and the word pia means soft. The word pia means soft. So this is a soft innermost membrane. So these 3 membranes are collectively known as the meninges. So the work of the meninges is to give additional protection to the spinal cord and they protect the spinal cord from any mechanical injury. Okay. So there are 2 important parts which are protecting the spinal cord. One is the vertebral column and the other one is the meninges. Now let's take a look at the structure of the spinal cord. The spinal cord is thin, long and cylindrical. And as you can see here, the spinal cord is made up of 2 distinct regions. So one is the white matter and the other region which is looking like a shape of H is called as the grey matter. The white matter is made up of the axons of the neuron and the grey matter is made up of the cyton of the neuron. Okay, and in the center there is the central canal which is filled with the cerebrospinal fluid. So what is the work of the cerebrospinal fluid here? cerebrospinal fluid acts like a shock absorbent, thereby also protecting the spinal cord. Alright. From the upper end of the head zone. So I hope you remember this is the head zone, right? So from the upper end of the head zone will arise a horn. Okay. And this horn which is arising from the head zone is called as the posterior horn. One more horn will arise from the lower end of the head zone, and this horn which is arising from the lower end of the head zone is called as the anterior horn. Okay. So a bundle of nerve fibers will enter into the posterior horn, and this route through which the bundle of nerve fibers are going to enter into the posterior horn is called as the afferent route or the dorsal route. And then there will be a bundle of nerve fibers which is going out of the anterior horn, and this route through which the bundle of nerve fibers are moving outward is called as the ventral route or the efferent route. Okay. I will draw the same horns here also on this side. So the sensory neurons will enter into the dorsal route or the afferent route. And then the motor neurons. So what are motor neurons? Motor neurons are going to carry the message from the brain to a muscle cell or to a gland. Okay. So the motor neurons will move outward through the ventral route or the efferent route. So these two routes, the afferent route and the efferent route, will join together to form one spinal nerve. Okay. So this is about the structure of the spinal cord. Now let's take a look at the most important function of the spinal cord, which is reflex action. So now let's discuss about what is reflex action. For each and every stimulus, there is the response. So this we have studied already. So how is this response happening? So we are able to respond to a stimulus with the help of our processing center, which is the brain. So the brain helps us to interpret what kind of stimulus was that, and based on that it will help us to respond. But then what is this reflex action? In case of reflex action, an organism is going to respond, but here there is not going to be the involvement of the brain, but there is going to be involvement only of the spinal cord. Okay. So reflex action is any response which happens without our consciousness. So when I say there is no involvement of brain in reflex action, it's very evident that there is not going to be our consciousness. Alright. So reflex action is any response which happens to a stimulus without our consciousness. So we are not conscious about what is happening, the way in which we are responding. All of a sudden, if I give you a hot cup of tea, what will you do? You will immediately withdraw your hand out of the cup. So there is no involvement of your brain at that particular moment. Okay. So that is only reflex action. So reflex action is any response that occurs or happens without your consciousness. So in case of reflex action, there is no involvement of your brain, but spinal cord is only going to be involved. Okay. So reflex action is of two types. One is simple or basic reflexes, and the other one is acquired or conditioned reflexes. Now first let's discuss about what is simple or basic reflexes. So in case of simple reflexes, this is something which is inbuilt. In case of simple reflexes, nobody is going to teach you what you have to do. Okay. So for example, sneezing, yawning, okay, all these are simple reflexes which is inbuilt in our body. Okay, so no one teaches us how to do all these things. So that is known as simple or basic reflexes. So when we move on to acquired or conditioned reflex, so this needs practice and someone has to teach how we have to perform this particular response. That is only known as acquired or conditioned reflex. So what's the meaning of acquiring? Acquiring means getting it. So how are we going to get this particular response? We are going to be learning this particular response by practice. Alright. So that is only known as acquired or conditioned reflex. A very good example for acquired reflex is playing an instrument. So in order to play an instrument, a person needs to practice and he has to learn. So this is something which we don't know. If I give you an instrument, you will not be able to play without practicing it, without learning it. So this acquired reflex is something a person needs to learn and practice is also required. So this type of response where we need to learn and practice is known as acquired reflexes. Now we will discuss about reflex action with an example to understand it better. So now let's take a look at the pathway by which the reflex action is going to be accomplished. Okay. So now first I have taken the example of a person touching a hot object. So when a person touches an hot object, how is a sudden change or sudden reflex going to happen in his body? That is what we are going to be discussing right now. Okay, so a person is touching the hot object. So when a person touches the hot object, the receptors which are present in our skin will be able to detect the stimulus. Okay, so I already told you that for each and every stimulus there is going to be a specific receptor. Okay, for sensing the smell there is a specific receptor. For tasting there is a specific receptor. So for every stimulus there is going to be a specific receptor. The receptor which will be able to detect heat is called as thermoreceptor. So all of you know what is the meaning of thermo. Thermo means heat. So with the help of the thermoreceptors which are present in our skin, you will be able to feel the heat. Okay. So when a person touches the hot object, the thermoreceptors will sense the heat and it will trigger the sensory neurons. So what are sensory neurons? Sensory neurons are neurons which will carry the message from sense organs. Okay. So once the thermoreceptors sense the heat, the message will be sent into the spinal cord through the sensory neuron. Okay, so through the sensory neuron, the message is going to be sent into the spinal cord. So through which route is it entering into the spinal cord? Through the sensory neuron is entering the spinal cord through the dorsal route. And this is the sensory neuron. So the sensory neuron has taken the information or taken the message into the spinal cord. So what is the message here? The message is the person has touched the hot object. That is going to be the message. So then what happens is, in the spinal cord, the message will be interpreted. Okay. So the message will be interpreted by the spinal cord. And it will transfer the command to the interneuron. What is this interneuron? Interneuron is also known as the relay neuron. Okay. The work of interneuron is to pass the command from the sensory neuron to a motor neuron. So that is the basic work of an interneuron. So spinal cord interprets the message and it will convey the command to the interneuron. Interneuron will thereby transfer the command to the motor neuron. Okay, so it will transfer the message to the motor neuron. So the motor neuron will take the command and it will go out of the spinal cord through the ventral root, and then it will reach the muscle cell. Okay, so this message will reach the muscle cell. So this is the muscle cell which I am drawing. Okay, so once the message has been interpreted, it will send the spinal cord will send the message to the interneuron. The interneuron will pass the command. What is the command which is coming? The command should be the person has to take the hand away from the hot object. So that message will be passed on to the motor neuron. Then the motor neuron will carry the command to the muscle cell. Okay, or muscle cell is also known as the effector cell. So the message is going to be conveyed to the muscle cell. So once the message is conveyed by the motor neuron to the muscle cell, the muscles will immediately contract, thereby helping the person to remove the hand or take the hand away from the hot object. Okay, so this is the way in which the spinal cord will help us to reflexly respond to a particular stimulus. So here if you see, in order to accomplish or in order to achieve the reflex action, nerves are all getting involved. So the pathway which is taken by the nerve impulse to complete the reflex action is only known as reflex arc. Okay, so what is reflex arc? Reflex arc is the pathway which is taken by the nerve impulse. So you can see here sensory neurons are involved, interneurons are involved, and then we have the motor neurons which are involved. So this pathway which is taken by the neurons in order to accomplish reflex action is only known as reflex arc. Okay, I told that the spinal cord is only going to be completely involving in reflex action. But then for one thing alone, brain will also be involved, and that is for storing the message. So what kind of message is brain going to store? Now I gave you the hot object and you touched it, you felt the heat, and with the help of the reflex action you were able to remove your hand away from the hot object. Now this memory will be stored in the brain. Okay, now if I give you the same hot object the next time, will you touch it? You will not. Okay, so how are you not touching it? It is because the memory of the past experience is going and getting stored in the brain. So thereby making you possible to not do the same mistake again. Okay, so this is about reflex action. So just imagine if reflex action is not happening. So what has to happen? You are touching a hot object. The message has to go to the brain has to process it, then the message has to come back. By then what will happen? Your hand is going to be burnt. So to overcome this problem, this is like a shortcut. Okay, so what is happening? This is like a shortcut where the spinal cord itself will take over and it will process the message and it will give the command to the motor neuron. Motor neuron will in turn tell the muscle cell to do that particular action. Okay, so this is about the reflex action. I will repeat this once again for you. So when a person touches a hot object, the receptors which are present will be able to sense the stimulus. So once the stimulus is felt or once the stimulus is sensed, the sensory neurons will be triggered. So these sensory neurons will then take the message into the spinal cord. So in the spinal cord is going to interpret the message and then the message will go into the interneuron. So interneuron, what is this interneuron? Interneuron is going to pass the message from the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. So it's the interneuron and it is also known as the relay neuron. Then once the message is passed into the relay neuron, the command will then be sent into the motor neuron. So I have drawn it here, right? This is the motor neuron. So the command, what is going to be the command here? The particular reflex or the particular response a person has to do is going to be the command here. So that command through the motor neuron will reach the muscle cell. So why is it reaching the muscle cell? Then only the muscle will contract and the person will be able to take the hand away from the hot object. So the motor neuron will convey the message or will convey the command to the muscle cell. Thereby the muscles will contract and the person will be able to take the hand away from the hot object. Okay, so this is completely happening with the help of the spinal cord only. But then there is a small part of the brain in reflex action which is storing of the memory. Okay, so what has happened to you? The information which has happened to you will be stored in the brain as a memory, so that next time when you come across the same situation, you will be able to face it better. Okay, so this is about reflex action. I hope you understood this topic very clearly. Thank you.